Everybody, welcome back. Welcome back to Underdog Fantasy Best Ball Draft number 5. We're doing 4 best ball drafts per week on Underdog Fantasy here on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel. This is draft number 5. If you watched the first 4 in this series, you've seen our NFL manager Chris Rooney. You've seen our NFL best ball lead analyst Chuck Silver. But we brought the OGs back for show number 5. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by our other original co-founder, Waleed, aka Lead, aka PC Lead, aka Fake Andy Lead, aka Tiptoe Burglars. Waleed, what's up, brother? How you doing?
Good, Brian. I am great. Excited. It is um, uh, the first day of a handful of contests for Underdog. And yeah, I know Best Ball Mania launched last week. And then, I think it's kind of that time of year where like you want to do some, but then you're like, all right, chill. It's May. We don't even know what the schedule looks like for week 17. And it's cool to kind of have these more concentrated window tournaments for also just like smaller entry fees.
Yeah, exactly. So what Chris and Chuck drafted in the first 4 drafts were Best Ball Mania 5, the biggest flagship contest for Underdog Fantasy. As Waleed was just alluding to, I'm going to pull it up on screen here really briefly. You see that Underdog draft, they dropped today the Big Dog, which is a $500 entry, 64 max for you ballers out there. The Puppy, which is a $5 150 max. The $4 25 max Chihuahua, which is what we'll be drafting today. And the Golden, which is a $10 single entry. Tune in tomorrow night. Chris and our social media manager Derek will be drafting that one live and talking single entry strategy. Uh, but what I want to do today, so we will get into the draft room here in a second, and as we do that, uh, Waleed and I we're going to discuss the differences in strategy between these limited time window contests like the Puppy, like the Chihuahua, which start now and will probably end, knowing how popular these damn things are, in the next couple of days, maybe next couple of weeks, versus the Best Ball Mania draft, which literally drafts from May until September. So we'll get into the draft here in a second. This is a live stream, so if you guys have questions, we always love to hear from you. Throw them in the live chat here on YouTube. You can also watch this on replay, of course. So Lee, when you're first thinking about this, Best Ball Mania drafts May through September. The Puppy, Chihuahua. To me, the first thing that I think of is that everyone in the Puppy and the Chihuahua, whatever iteration this is, they are drafting within the same parameters for the most part. Now, the Puppy, if it extends a little bit because the schedule is being released next Wednesday, and there may be some people who draft before a schedule is released. There may be some people who draft after a schedule is released. Whereas in Best Ball Mania, those who draft now will definitely draft before the schedule is released for those who draft in August and September. I think that's one big disadvantage. Obviously, you have the injury factor for Best Ball Mania versus these limited window contests. And then you have ADP value that you may get. But is it worth it in a playoff top heavy format like Best Ball Mania? So, what are your thoughts when you are approaching these smaller 25 max or these limited time window contests like the Puppy, Chihuahua, and the Golden?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great point. First of all, I've drafted 5 best ball manias and I had to stop. Absolutely minus EV, right? We don't know um, what the playoff schedule looks like. It's so early. So yeah, I had to slap myself on the wrist and kind of cut myself off. Now, these smaller window tournaments, um, at least, we know that now, look, sometimes it's uncharted territory, but I'm going to assume they're going to finish in the next month. Just given, I mean, at the rate that we see, I mean, we saw the mini Schnauzer, how quick that lasted a week, right? And, um, so within this window, I'd say basketball gets more popular. I feel like ADPs have gotten a lot sharper earlier on. I don't have data to kind of back it up and say, where things were last year, 2 years ago. I saw someone put out some great work. I wish I could cite exactly who it was regarding like rookie ADPs. And I almost feel like edge is kind of gone as people have gotten sharper on, like round 2 receivers, right? And perhaps, players that in the past, maybe like 2 years ago, you almost would have to wait until training camp to get the edge. So, like, let's be real. You're not really drafting here to get any edge. You're drafting here to build teams, to have fun. And, maybe you can get access, like, I don't know, let's say, for instance, like Rasheed Rice, something like that happens. Perhaps you get a window on a player, but for the most part, it is like you're kind of going into it saying, I'd say going into it knowing you're sacrificing some edge, right? Versus waiting until the schedules are released next week.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just got into the draft. It felt nearly immediately as we were trying to preface it with some strategy discussion, but we'll continue this strategy discussion through the first couple of rounds here. I want to get Jetta on my roster. We talked about him earlier in our private chat lead. So I'm going to
Mhm.
take Justin Jefferson here at number 4, and we'll continue this discussion because you hear the argument for drafting earlier is multiplying those ADP edges. And if ADP is sharper, like you say, then that edge really isn't there. And then you're just getting all the downside of drafting early without really much upside. And it is interesting because we've seen in the past high advance rates for players don't necessarily mean that player is the key to winning the biggest prizes in best ball with these playoff formats. It's really about getting there and then having differentiated rosters and having those players that you definitely need who go off in weeks 14, 15, 16, and 17 in some contests. So a great example was, I think, last year or the year before, Josh Jacobs was a player that you definitely needed to advance for the most part, but then busted in the first round of the playoffs, and most of the people who rostered him were eliminated. So yes, you can draft and get edges and have 40, 50% exposure to one player here early, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a top prize at the end.
Yeah, I mean, the best we can do is honestly just stack, right? And focus on what we do know, which are correlated teammates for the most part. Yeah, there are some like even like thinking about like Ezekiel Elliott, right, who re-signed with the Cowboys. I mean, his ADP it didn't take long, and usually I
No.
think players it takes a little longer for their ADPs to fall versus rise. But like someone like Zeke, he's already and he could continue to go up, but the market is just sharp. Anyone that's drafting right now, for the most part, like they kind of know what they're doing. They've been around, the best ball streets for at least a few years now. So, but I like it. The Jetta start, and you're on to round two coming up here. What are you thinking? Who you have in mind here? Are you going to start receiver heavy? Take a shot at perhaps like Devon A. Chain or Kyron. I still feel like he's going to drop, so maybe not the best pick right now.
Yep. Yeah, so it's funny because I did my first best ball draft of the season earlier today. Once these new contests dropped, just to get my feet wet. I took a glance at ADP earlier, but it's always jarring to do your first draft and see where these players are being drafted in the new year after comparing where they were drafted last year, how you played them in DFS, and there are some players going rounds 3 through 6 that I'm just like, man, I don't want to touch these players in this range.
Yeah,
And again, this is without doing too much research. And my strategy
I
has
think it
always been,
almost starts round two. Honestly, like
yeah,
if we were to
yes,
like give out auction values, like there's a pretty steep cutoff where, I mean, even right now you're looking at Ayuk, Adams, Chris Olave.
right,
Um, you know, it's a pretty flat tier. It feels like for the next like 10 or so receivers. So in a way, like you kind of, but that's the same for everyone drafting, right? So it's not like someone at like 204 is going to get a significant edge. So I do like the first round feels pretty strong. I don't
yep,
see
agree.
much movement there. I think we'll fast forward to September and like those same 11, 12 guys are going to go where they're going. And then you might get some fluctuations with these guys, but
Yeah.
some of it will just be based on use.
So I think so. Really quickly, so we have back-to-back teammates here: Ayuk, Debo, Nico, Stefan Diggs, Mike Evans. Just really quickly, help me make this pick. Do you have a preference for any of these guys, or even someone a little bit lower?
Yeah, I like Ayuk. I like Nico. Mike Evans is solid. When I think of just kind of that explosive, big play sort of, league winning week, you can throw Debo in there, but it's
I'll take Ayuk.
really pick your poison and then go from there, I'd say. So
All right.
yeah, now you got Ayuk, and now um, with these two players, you can start thinking ahead as far as potential stacking teammates, and also now how you want to address other positions.
Right. So I will bring up our new tool here, and I do have two data points or two topics I want to discuss here with you around these early round picks. Really quickly, this is our ADP tracker tool. Our stack secret tool will be up once the schedule is released, but this shows you where players are being drafted at least before the schedule is released, you can select a team from the drop down menu. I'll select San Francisco just now. So you can see where teammates are being drafted. So you can prepare those stacks in advance. I see Brock Purdy round 9 or so. So maybe I eye that. JJ McCarthy from Minnesota is being drafted round 16 or so. So another one I can potentially plan around. The the two topics I want to discuss, Lee, were you have we talked about the volatility of these players already, and the one that stood out to me was Saquon Barkley, and a second
Mhm.
contract running back on a new team just seems like a recipe for disaster in the second round for me, and that could be said for Josh
Yeah.
Jacobs as well in the third round.
Yeah, the problem is, projectable volume is almost available later more now than ever, and it's continued to trend that way. So you can definitely tell yourself a story with Barkley. He clearly lost some explosiveness, but at the same time, now he is in the best situation he's been in. The tush push, get ready to learn the tush push, buddy, right? He's going to be pushing Jalen's ass, but at the same time, he can still have explosive games if they don't like even DeAndre Swift last year felt like he drew poorly within the work inside the five. But I mean, I like Waddle here, Neighbors, just kind of it looks like he took Neighbors there. So yeah, I mean, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, not a bad start. I'd say probably like half my teams from drafting so far have started this way, and I'm pretty okay with it. Some of these quarterback options do get tempting. Um, Laporta is a guy that I've had a tough time clicking on,
Yes.
not to any fault of his own, but just because where Kelsey was going, where McBride was going, but Kelsey's slowly compared to the big board and McBride, like that gap is kind of closed a little more, so it makes it a little more feasible to click Laporta. And I'm hoping that's where we'll get to by the end of summer, where you don't feel like you're reaching around.
It certainly feels that way, and I think it just might just be the availability of guys here. Like it's Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, ETN, and then quarterbacks basically. So I certainly understand why he's being pushed up, but it doesn't make it any easier to click on him. The other point I
Mhm.
wanted to bring up to you was it was really Nico and Stefan Diggs, right? Like there's no way both those guys return second round value. And Tank Dell's being drafted
Mhm.
what in round 4? Let me just pull up the Texans ADP really quickly.
Yeah, 43 ADP.
Yeah, so 2, 3, 4 basically, and we know that's not going to happen. And so one of those picks are really bad, potentially two.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I would say I would almost disagree in the sense of just given the format, right, of best ball.
sure, sure,
Now,
sure.
if we're talking season long, it feels a little different, but it's a wacky game. Best ball is a wacky game, and either of these guys could be, wide receiver twos, but be exactly the guys you need. They're tied to CJ Stroud. That's an explosive offense. So for me personally, like I think the receivers are priced really well, and I don't want to take declare like if I had to tell you who's my favorite receiver on the Texans, I'd say it's Nico Collins, right? I
Sure.
think he is a better vertical threat at this point in his career. When it comes to these like 30 plus games, I think he's more likely to deliver on that. But at the same time, I could also see Stephon Diggs, right, be more consistent through those weeks 15 through 17. And I mean, ultimately, yeah, they might not pay off, but at the same time, they might be all right, and it might not be about having these guys that really carry you to advance as much as it is advancing with them to those final weeks.
For sure. All right, now really quickly, fourth pick coming up. Mahomes just went. We have McBride, Stroud, George Pickens, Pacheco, Cook. Feels gross.
Mhm.
Who you got here?
I mean, more times than not here, I am taking Trey McBride. I feel pretty good about that. I
Agreed.
think, I mean, you got all these NFC guys. Maybe you'll luck into a matchup there,
Yeah.
week 17. But I just love combining him and Kyler too. You can get Kyler pretty good value. And then, um, now you've kind of knocked that tight end position out. And tight end's really weird this year where it gets pretty gross quick. Now, there are some guys I like at the end, but just having like a pillar like McBride just feels good. And also, like, there's a scenario I can talk myself into McBride having, you know, a historic tight end
Totally.
season.
Totally.
based off how him and Kyler were looking last year. Now you get Marvin Harrison Jr. Hopefully that improves the offensive efficiency. Dude's a monster. So it's not like it came out of nowhere. You know, he had opportunities his at the end of his rookie year and kind of underwhelmed, but like it's a Mackey Award winner and like he could be the real deal. He could be the guy that absolutely is the tight end one overall.
Absolutely. So I've just added Kyler Murray to my queue. That way I can not forget about him a little bit later here if is somebody I want to
Mm-hmm.
stack with Trey McBride. And uh, we mentioned the Houston receivers, Chicago receivers, another same situation, just a little bit less cost with Keenan Allen, DJ
Mm-hmm.
Moore, and Roma Dunze. Now that is with a rookie quarterback, nonetheless. So some of those guys will not reach value, probably maybe all
Yeah.
three even. But like you said, Amari Cooper comes to mind, where he didn't have the greatest season last year, but you absolutely needed him to win the best ball finals in most cases
Mm-hmm.
because of his just massive score in whatever week it was. And so even if he
Yeah.
underperforms, he's going to have a lower advance rate. And that's why you want to have equal exposure to a lot of these guys if you're drafting a bunch of teams. And that
Mm-hmm.
is my next point I want to touch on here with you, Lee, that we've been discussing in our private chats. But really quickly, round 5 here. Anyone stand out to you? We got the Buffalo guys, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Rashad White. Again, I'm not excited about anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think Amari Cooper is just a guy here I would take my medicine on. I feel like, you know, that's just going to give you more opportunities to take advantage of the running back pool a little later on. I mean, I like all these guys like Cooper, Terry, Jaden Reed. Like I loved him last year. That price feels a little steep.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, Amari Cooper, I'm still looking at him as the clear number one in that passing game. And towards the end of last year, we saw Cleveland. I don't know if it was because of Joe Flacco, but like Kevin Stefanski, he was opening up the playbook. They were, I don't remember exactly where they ranked, but definitely on the higher end of pass rate over expected. The Nick Chubb injury, right? So you look at even their backfield. All they did was bring on Dante Foreman. And they, you know, traded for Jerry Judy. So, yeah, this could be. I mean, they're a good team altogether, right? Like it's a pretty good team, good situation, and you could be getting the number one player on a pass first efficient offense. So, and then
So,
once again, now you're just opening up other stacking options. If you get sniped on Kyler, right?
yeah.
Deshaun Watson's quarterback 22. So, and then with neighbors, it's like well, we don't really want to prioritize Daniel Jones. So now we just have multiple outs, I think, and same with Jefferson. As much as you know, JJ McCarthy could be a value, there's still a little it gets thin. Like, what if he doesn't start for the first 4 weeks, right? And it kind of can mess up your roster structure as well.
Totally. And this is much more free in drafting before the schedules are released. Normally, when I've been drafting on stream and in the past season and doing my own individual drafts, my queue would have 50 players by now and just trying to spider web together all these week 15, 16, 17 possibilities. Not even know what those
Mm-hmm.
are right now. It's a lot more freeing. So, um,
Yeah.
so the biggest question I want to talk to you, the biggest strategy point is something that we're looking at for our best ball guide, which will be released on the site in the coming days, if not weeks, focused on Best Ball Mania, but it'll have a lot of data points, a lot of strategies from Chuck's success last year, massive year for Chuck last year. And one thing I was researching for the guide, and you and I were talking about this earlier this week, Lead, was player exposures if you're drafting a bunch of teams. And I think if you're drafting a bunch of teams with this many opponents, I think the average person's first thought may be the biggest way to get an edge is to really hit and be way overweight on a bunch of the players that you need. Guys that outperform their ADP, guys that finish in the top 3 at their position, and having 30, 40, 50, 60% exposure to these guys. Uh, Turns out that's not really the case. You don't really need that to happen. In fact, most of the finalists last year in Best Ball Mania 4 had relatively even exposures. And I think the biggest thing that showcases this point is that of the players that the finalists were overweight on, Lead, they missed on most of them, right? Like it's not a requirement to hit on your highest exposed players. Yes, it would be nice. But what it really shows me is that lineup construction, roster construction, and really the overall picture you're telling and how you distribute those players, it's much more important than individual player exposure. And that's really the topic I want to focus on here today.
Yeah, I agree. I think honestly having very strong player takes in a format like this, it's just really risky because you could be right um, for 15 weeks or 14 weeks and then wrong for a week or two, right? And all of a sudden that's not the play. And also just building diverse teams, right? Like don't get in the habit of, clicking the same kind of guys when you're drafting out of the same position. I think it's very easy to get caught into that. Like if let's say you really like Aaron Jones and George Kittle, and then you just end up having a parlay of, and I actually kind of like Aaron Jones right now for your team, kind of with Justin Jefferson as well. But hey, Brian Thomas, shout out to him.
My bad.
So we got five receivers there. But yeah, I think being able to diversify, like for me, if I'm over like 20% on any player, which is over two times the field, like I really have to audit that. And I have to
Yeah.
ask myself, do I think there's such a significant advantage that I'm willing to almost swallow a potential L in like the DFS format of, weeks 15 through 17? And most of the time, the answer is no.
Right. It really is. It really is. And the only guys I've really considered to do something like that is maybe these like round 10 plus running backs who I feel have a clear path to
Mhm.
being fantasy relevant, or guys being drafted rounds, 14 through 16, 14 through 18,
Right.
that unclear
The
what they're
opportunity
playing.
cost is so low.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So uh, so what it tells me is that lineup construction, roster construction is so important here, and just making sure that
Mhm.
your lineup tells the right story. And
Mhm.
I talked about this a lot in the past, but I think it would be nice for either newer viewers or people who watched last year just to get a fresher take. In your mind, what does it mean? Let's make my pick first, and I'll have you answer this question.
Yeah.
But what does
So
it
how do
mean?
you feel? Do you feel is it Kyler time here? Do you want to drop a running back because it's kind of a interesting spot where some of these running backs now are going to start flying off the board.
It's true. But I read some stuff today about zero running back. It's just fresh in my mind, and I did want to come into this draft, just draft zero running back, see what it looks like. So I'm going to take
Mhm.
Kyler here. We'll wait on
Let's
running
go.
back, and we'll draft a bunch of running backs
Cool.
here in the next few rounds.
Perfect.
So, so that kind of leads into this answer for you. In your mind, what does proper lineup construction, roster construction, uh, number of running backs, receivers, quarterbacks stacking, when you put all that together in just in a bowl and think about what it means for being plus EV in terms of best ball drafting.
Yeah.
Where does your mind go?
I think Mike Leone in his best ball manifesto, he described it best as far as really kind of attributing these positions by auction dollars or just like, if you spend early tight end, right, then you probably like us drafting Trey McBride, this is probably going to be a two tight end build, right? We drafted five receivers already. We probably don't want to draft like nine receivers on this
Yeah.
team, right? Considering what um, allocation we've given. So we almost want to draft as if we're right. I found myself, especially same with quarterbacks. So it's kind of up to you how you want to, you know, assess Kyler. Like for me, he's a guy that I'm comfortable going with two quarterbacks.
Sure.
However, if it breaks in a way where we are getting correlated pieces like Deshaun Watson, right? And Brock Purdy for whatever reason, then I think it makes sense. But I think it's good to kind of start out just asking yourself like, what if my first five out of my first seven picks hit? How should I construct the rest of the roster? Obviously, you want to draft more receivers than running backs. I think even if you go zero running back, it's just hard to make sense of investing so much capital in a position where you only have to start two players versus at receiver. We're gonna have to start three, and even if the flex is let's say half and half, um, you're still probably gonna want to draft just more receivers than running backs. But I'd say some of my favorite drafts are two quarterbacks, two tight ends, five running backs, right, and then the rest receivers.
Yeah.
But once again, it just depends on the build. Like, so I don't like to go into it with an idea in mind, but I definitely have like Like that's like I'd say that's the sweet spot, and then I can add or subtract based off how the draft goes, based off potential stacking opportunities and so forth.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and it may be overwhelming for those of you who are new to best ball or even played best ball last year or in previous seasons and maybe haven't had much success. But I would also compare this to March Madness brackets. If you think you have an edge, you may not realize that edge in one season, especially when the nature of
Mm-hmm.
the payouts are so top heavy. Like Lead, you and I both think we have an edge in how we build March Madness brackets for bracket pools, and we believe that rightfully or wrongfully believe that we have an edge in best ball. But just because we believe that, we have to be prepared for losing seasons here because of how the payouts are structured. Um, but it doesn't mean that we're not plus EV and we won't be extremely profitable over the course of 5 seasons or 10 seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're on the clock here. Um, you got a few good options at running back. I'll let you make this decision, obviously, but something I've found myself as well, and you tell me if you think this is a bad strategy because sometimes it feels really gross after I do it. But um, like after David Njoku, there does seem to be a drop off at tight end,
Hmm.
and even for a build like this, like I would be okay taking David Njoku here, right? Like in theory, let's say you didn't take Brian Thomas and
Right?
instead you had taken Aaron Jones.
Sure.
I would be really considering David Njoku here and already planning ahead for the Cleveland Brown stack with Watson.
Yep.
But the reason I say that is tight ends for the most part, a lot of these guys after, him, you're just hoping you get, 4 catches and a touchdown. Clearly, David Njoku showed us his not only explosive play rate, but his ability to command targets. Now, that wasn't with Watson, but there's a scenario I can just see where David Njoku scores multiple 20 plus point games, right? And um, essentially, he can be a flex option for you. Or let's say Trey McBride, high advance rate player, but he has a bad week, right? In those elimination weeks. And then it just happens to coincide with a week where Dave Njoku blows up. Now all of a sudden, you're advancing Trey McBride. So,
Yes.
and then also now, if you did take him, you're almost like to touch tight end. I'm done with tight end. I don't have to worry about it. Um, and there's almost some relief in that where now you can be a little more narrow in the positions you're drafting.
Yeah, so now I am just after that explanation, I'm praying he falls to me one more pick because I agree. And in previous years, even last year, and not to be too backward looking, but there were guys like Laporta, McBride that seemed like obvious standout picks that could be league winners that had upside to crush their ADP. All right, sweet. He survived. So we'll take Njoku. I really like
Nice.
this call. Where this year I don't really
Mhm.
see that many after round 9 or 10 that I'm like, oh yeah, this guy has a ton of upside. I could see it. I don't see that many. Maybe I'm missing. I haven't dug that
Yeah.
deep, obviously, but clearly you feel the same way.
I mean, it gets tough. Yeah, I think what it is we do need some. I mean, look, I like Jawan Johnson, right? I think, um, Hunter Henry is in a position to run a lot of routes, and if Drake May is really good, like given that receiver room, like could he could be solid. But like when we talk about like Laporta, we were literally talking about a top 2 tight end,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Ben Sinnott, like that's a guy that he's steamed up, but I look at him and like, would it surprise me if he runs 50? I mean, look, Cliff Kingsbury had Trey McBride running behind Zach Ertz, right? For
Ready to do it again.
yeah. So just don't know. So I like Pat Fryermuth. I actually think he's in an interesting position because when I look at like what I want from a tight end, I want volume and touchdown upside. And with Pat Fryermuth, Deontay Johnson's gone. That receiver room is pretty thin right now, and I just see a scenario where he is a guy that gets 120 targets, right? But after that, I don't know. It feels yucky. So just having these two guys, once again, it does present that opportunity to ping pong weeks, right?
True.
And of course, we already have Amari Cooper, so that makes it even a little more enticing as well.
Exactly. No, exactly. I really like the way you described that there, and it really fits for this type of build. And again, it's forward thinking. It's thinking in the playoffs, which is where we need to be different than our opponents. If McBride is on our roster and we make the finals, he likely had a big part to do with that. which likely means he had a big part in other people advancing to the finals. But if he fails, we have a legitimate backup option, and especially works for this zero running back type of build. Where if we sacrifice
Mhm.
receiver early, I'm not sure this would be the best approach. This is a great example in
Mhm.
ebbing and flowing with the draft to build a story that makes sense. That's going to be different when the money counts.
Mhm. So I got a question for you here because this is usually where I start to get uncomfortable. And you took Zach Moss there for me.
Which I don't
I
like.
see it as like, okay, do we need to get some projectable volume here, right? Just to get some weeks to get us through.
Yep.
And now you almost look at like the shape of the running back room, and trying to think like, okay, how can I get projectable volume, but also like upside? And I still see guys that have legitimate upside, but it's starting to get thin as far as just guys that you can count on week in, week out. So I look at Brian Robinson as a guy that can do that.
Yep.
And then Zeke, right? And then after that, it's just like, oof. It's not like I like Kendra Miller. I like, um, Tajay Spears, Chase Brown, Gus Edwards. But there are scenarios where these guys feel like they're not going to be really helping you. Um, that's but part of the trade off of going receiver heavy and then taking your second tight end. We are almost drafting this team as if Zach Moss um, is going to be a piece. Now, let me ask you this: would you consider a Chase Brown in this sort of team?
That's interesting. I've always been of the belief that we draft as if we're right, which means we need Moss instead of Chase Brown here. I'm going to take Zeke though, just really quickly because I do think we need some projectable
Yeah.
volume, and so I'm going to take him here. But it is an interesting thought process. Another team that will be different. Um,
Mhm.
you need Moss throughout the season. He gets hurt. Brown comes in, vice versa, whatever that may be. But
Right.
to your point about zero running back and building around this roster, it's a really good idea. At least what I'd like to do on zero running back teams is try to get different types of profiles. If we draft six running backs, try to get one or two with projectable volume that are late, a couple that are maybe in timeshares where if there's an injury,
Hmm.
they can skyrocket into a top 12
Hmm.
performance. But even if they don't, they can give you some weeks with a couple fantasy points. And
Yeah.
then guys who have upside that are clearly behind someone that would succeed in case of an injury or
and
role
and
change.
that's how I feel about Tajay, Blake Corum,
Yes.
Zach Charbonnet, right?
Yep.
And then I'll let you kind of make your next pick here, but with running back ADP being more suppressed now than ever, I am starting to feel like I get drafting as if you're right, but a lot of times when we're betting on a running back, we're betting on the offensive environment, right? We're
True.
betting on an offense that's going to score touchdowns. And we know running backs are probably the easiest position to replace, both fantasy production, right? So that's why, like, even like, um, let's say you took Kenneth Walker, right, in the fifth, sixth round. I wouldn't think Zach Charbonnet in the 11th round is a bad pick because now you've locked up that backfield. You didn't spend anything. And then, I mean, those are like, what if, Kenneth Walker is a guy that is RB1 for the first 12, 13 weeks. And then all of a sudden, um, he gets hurt. Zach Charbonnet comes in, and now he gets 80% of the volume, which is why when I think of Corum, Charbonnet, I'm like, if something happens, what's the contingency value? Are they just going to be stuck in a committee? I think I feel pretty good about both Corum and Charbonnet, given like the depth behind them, that they are going to be bell cows. They're going to get the goal line work, passing down work. And it's one of those situations where you could almost say the handcuff actually gets put in a better position than the starter was because they're no longer competing with someone viable to get volume. So, but it does feel gross at times. But I think with the difference in ADP, it's more viable now than ever. Like I found myself having like if I spend a second round pick on Devon A-Chain or A-Chan, then I might why I shouldn't rule out taking Mostert,
Especially, I mean, look at
or
some of the
even
games they had
Jalen Red.
last year together, right? Like, there's no set, like, or if Achan's out a couple weeks, Mostert becomes a top option. So I do get it, and I think people are so, especially as the field gets sharper drafting. I think most people do avoid that. So maybe there was a minor edge in targeting those types of backfields and these types of
And
contests.
then why are we taking both Zach Moss and Chase Brown? It's not because of either of those guys. It's because of Joe Burrow. It's because of Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, that offensive environment, right? The same reason Mixon's volume was paying off. So it kind of goes back to like offensive environment. Now, Do I feel good about getting like I don't want to take Zamir White and Alex Madison. I don't feel good about that
Right.
offensive environment, right?
Right.
Um, but there, I don't want to also ignore player takes because I think we got to know what each player's archetype is. So a good example is like Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson. I think they both profile individually as guys who have proven at points in their career the coaches can give them volume. They're big, they're not undersized, and also they are plus in the receiving game, right? So once again, if something happened to Ramondre, I'm looking at Antonio Gibson as a potential RB1 that week, right? Um, I mean, Kamara. I like Kendra Miller. Jamal Williams is kind of that little thorn, and the vein of our existence is rational coaching because, of course, if something happens to Kamara, Jamal Williams is probably going to get 15 carries. But I like kind of thinking through scenarios like that.
Agree. I totally agree. And I really do like this range that we've been discussing. I want to try to get two guys from this range. I'm a sucker for Zach Charbonnet, so I'm going to take him again
And
here. So we'll take Sharp. He fits the same roles he did last year as a guy who could overtake Walker. And if Walker gets injured or fails to succeed, then he can benefit. And maybe he didn't show the ceiling that we would have hoped last year, but solid nonetheless.
mm-hmm,
But these guys who can give you some points with an explosive play on weeks where they're still the secondary back,
mm-hmm,
or maybe we're just wrong, right, about some
sure.
situations. But if there is an injury, they have clear upside. Like Marshawn Lloyd's a great example here, where everyone assumes Jacobs is going to have this massive role. Maybe he doesn't, right? Dylan signed a
Mm-hmm,
very team-friendly contract. That doesn't mean he's going to play any at all. Lloyd is divisive in terms of analytics, film,
mm-hmm,
draft capital, everything along those lines, landing spot even. But he's a guy that we don't know much about, and he's a guy that fits this team bill because we don't know anything, and because we don't know anything, we don't know his upside, which means it could be big.
mm-hmm. And I mean, I've loved what you've done with it. Like, I didn't like the Zach Moss pick to be honest, but I'm
I
starting to come around to,
I didn't either, to be fair.
um, but also it's like it's a bad pick, right? But like now you look at this room and you can see where the usable weeks are coming between even Zach Moss, Chase, however that is, Zeke. He's on a good offense. He's going to have a role. I mean, it's hard to project him getting less than half the carries, right?
Right.
And then Charbonnet, entering year two. I mean, this is a second round pick, right? And it's a new coaching staff. Who knows? Maybe they value his success rate and decision making over Kenneth Walker's explosive rate, and all of a sudden you get more of a. And at times there were kind of a little bit of a committee, but like he can give you usable weeks as well. But now it's like, so what I'd say here, this is where point I'm like I'm probably at most drafting one other running back, and that's if I really like him, right? So I'm not at this point for like I don't want to draft anyone that I think can be a zero at this point, especially this early in May.
For sure.
So as much as like the Kamani Vidal love has been going up, and you could be very right, but like once you take Marshawn Lloyd, once you're five running backs deep, that's where I get weary. And now I'm happy to kind of shift my focus. Now Kendra Miller, I feel good about his floor. I think he's going to be a part of the offense. Gibson, I feel good. Ray Davis, I feel pretty good, but he's a rookie, so there's always that uncertainty
Yep.
as well. But let me ask you this: as we're coming up here, and you're looking at Deshaun Watson, is it time to click him now? Let's look at the quarterback landscape.
Yep. Fingers crossed that Deshaun makes it back to us here. He is the highest remaining quarterback according to ADP. We'll see if we get sniped here in the next couple of picks. Because after him, it's Geno, Will Levis, JJ McCarthy. Massive drop off.
Yeah. So like for me, a personal like how I would have played it, I think, is I would have reached on him there and I would have been comfortable saying, you know what, Marshawn Lloyd, as much as maybe I like him, this might not be the team for him because I'd rather wait at this point and take one of the 3, 4 running backs that I'm okay with, and not give up Watson here for this particular
Totally.
stack.
Totally.
Um,
Totally. And again,
but
this shows the rust of not drafting for 6 months or whatever it is, and it's real for us, and it's going to be real for everyone out there watching as well.
yeah, I mean, I think I am now um, probably like 40 drafts in. And even like when you don't draft for a few days and then you get back into it, that rust is real.
It
So I
is.
think maybe the advantage of drafting early is especially if you're doing these small contests. It's like batting practice. You're getting
Yeah,
warmed up.
true.
And then you give yourself time to like also assess your exposures, look at your teams. That's something I've tried to focus more on versus just like draft and forget. It's like, no, go through your teams, really be audit yourself. Like, what could I have done differently if I redid this team? It's just a good exercise because then that's how you implement some of these things for future drafts. So, um,
Exactly. Just
but
really,
yeah, I mean,
really quickly, lead. We have a question here from Henry in the chat. What's up, Henry? I guess he's in a dynasty league. It doesn't specify here, but he's asking about trade advice. And I know you've been trading in your dynasty league like a sicko here in May. So I'm going to ask you this question. He says, "Is Kyler Murray and Rico Dowdle for Tua and Jalen Warren a fair deal in PPR?" So Kyler and Dowdle for Tua and Jalen Warren. What do you think? Either side get hosed by the other there. By the way, Deshaun last
man,
ditch. I'm taking Deshaun, so we lucked
yeah,
out.
let's go easy. Yeah, I will say that's a tough one. I think it really depends if it's super flex, right? If it's super flex, then I'm definitely leaning towards Kyler. I think he has unique upside, right? He's the kind of guy that can rush for 700 yards, and now that he has Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, like he can compete with the Josh Allens of the world. So if it is super flex, I'm definitely leaning that way. I really love Jalen Warren going into this year and next year. I think he also, to me, he profiles as a guy who he's explosive. He's elite in the receiving game. Like he could be the next Austin Eckler, right? In waiting. And this could be like that last year with like Melvin Gordon and Eckler. So I'd say it depends on the it doesn't help. It depends on the format. But I would just say if it is super flex, I'm going to take but if it's not, then it's just a matter of like positional value, right? Where single QB builds, it's now it just kind of depends on who else you have. But Kyler is probably the most likely to out of those four players, and it's a fair trade. So
He's saying
if you can give me some more context on the league, I'm happy to actually tell you how to.
he's saying the guy he's trading with has McBride, CMC, Achan, and Mostert, which is obviously stacked. In addition to the guys he was potentially trading or trading for. But enough of Henry. Sorry, Henry. Back to my pick, round 15. What are you thinking here, lead? Should we go back to receiver? We drafted 5 early.
Yeah, and it starts to get pretty gross here.
Yeah.
So, I think Wan'Dale Robinson's not a bad pick for this team, right? It's yucky in the sense of like you're almost betting on, um, the New York Giants offense, but I think Wan'Dale has shown us something. You do have the correlation there. I mean, it could be a situation where also like you're kind of hedging your neighbor's bet if he starts slow, or I just think Wandale is like this front office drafted him. He is a guy that like he's not necessarily a player that is going to has that like top 15, 20 receiver upside, but he does have usable week upside. And given at this point how much we invested, like we'll take that for this build.
That's fair. I appreciate everything you said. I did not take him. I went with Javon Baker
Oh,
instead.
hey, I love that. I mean, so I have a question because I was big on Javon Baker pre-draft, and now he's steamed up.
Yeah.
He is a fourth round pick, right? Which is kind of crazy. That just shows how sharp the ADP environment is. Where in the past, this is a dude who I would imagine would not he'd be an 18th round pick, right? And he's exactly the kind of guy where I want to keep tabs on, right? I really want to see what the training camp reports are,
Yep.
kind of what the buzz is. It's a crowded, like a lot can go wrong with that pick, right? It's a crowded receiving room. Um, Not to say that it's a dangerous receiving room, but he does profile as a true X receiver, which you could say separates himself from the rest of the room. But I would say it I like him right now. We have three rookie receivers, which um, it's okay. I think considering two of these guys are first rounders and have a clear path to playing time. But yeah, I've had a tough one with him. I love him in Dynasty, um, redraft, but also at the same time, it's like we're at the point of the draft where what's the difference between a round 15 and round
Exactly.
18
Let
pick?
me let me ask you this: do you think a player of his profile, fourth round pick, pretty open for competition in terms of targets, uh, but could also not play much at all? The offensive environment isn't that great. We don't think it will be. Do you
Mm.
think drafting in May for a wide receiver heavy early build, he makes more sense for that? Or does he make more sense for a team where we wait on receiver, which I don't really think there will be many teams like that? Or do you think this doesn't matter at all? It's just he's round 15. We're taking him for potential upside here.
I think in the latter case, like say you didn't take Brian Thomas, and instead you took, you went running back, and then you may have took like a more flourish type of receiver. I think he'd make sense, but honestly, I think that just gets too micro at the end of
Yep.
the day. Like
Yeah.
either his round 15 value is going to be an absolute home run because he does profile as a guy you probably want towards the end of the year when Drake May is starting,
Yep.
when he is probably taken over like the starting role. Or it's going to be, it was just a wasted pick, right? Which you could really say
About anyone
at
here.
this point.
Yeah. Really quickly, do you like a running back 6 here in May, or do you think it's too early in the calendar year to potentially take a zero with one of these spots?
Yeah, I think at this point Herbert is interesting because we know he's good and he might get a boost from a potential trade. But I don't want to touch any of like these rookies for your specific team at
That's
this
fair.
point, right? Like Dante Foreman, like if anything, like maybe your last running back is Dante Foreman, right? You get a little more projectable volume early in the season, and to correlate with your pieces. So Herbert makes sense, or just going receiver does too.
Cool.
And if you take him here now at this point, like obviously you're taking two straight receivers, and the structure at this point is pretty flat for receiver as well. So
Yep.
whether you take him here or not, like I like this running back room now.
Cool.
Now it makes sense for this to be a six running back build. Um, and now it gets fun because these receivers here, it's like you're either ducking landmines or you're getting usable weeks. So
Yep.
I like Robinson. I like Boyd. I think those are guys who would complement like Javon Baker well, where
Yep.
it's like, okay, I feel good about these guys running routes in the early part of the season. Um, Elijah Moore, as much of a letdown as he's been in, he does make sense for this team, and he's clearly someone that they like and they will use. Um,
Really quickly, I think
Brendan
just
Rice.
just really quickly, I think that's a great point that many people may not consider with roster construction. Is I'm going to take Demarcus Robinson here to balance what you said. Is balancing how or when you expect most of your players to start succeeding. So if we do have three rookie receivers, we know rookie receivers tend to produce more in the second half of their rookie year than the first half, which if that's going to happen, that may put us a little bit behind the eight ball in the first 6 weeks when we have to advance out of our group. And if that's the case, we want some veterans who are going to be on the field week one, getting targets, getting carries, getting opportunities to help combat that potential loss of playing time or loss of production from these rookies. So I think that's a great point. Taking Baker, Robinson back to back, taking Robinson with guys like Neighbors, Thomas, and Baker, it really makes a ton of sense. So that's a really good call.
Yeah, and I like looking at the positional rooms, and trying to make sense of like the whole view, right? Of like what am I expecting early versus what am I expecting later? Um, Same with the running backs, how we talked about it. Who can give me just even if it's an 8 point week from someone versus hey, I'm risking an absolute zero and being able to find that balance. And I think it's like you don't want to go too far in one direction. When I look at this receiving room, like, look, Jefferson, Ayuk, Cooper, they're going to be in your lineup, right?
Yeah.
Not like every week, right? Even if Jefferson or Ayuk gets 3 for 30, it's like, all right, well, that's just, we're going to eat that week. Neighbors and Thomas, I think we should expect them to be on the field early. Like, there's no reason that, like, would it surprise? Like, maybe Neighbors. The question is around the offense and the upside, but I feel like there's a floor there too. Even though he's a rookie, like this dude is going to get like 4 or 5 catches week one. It might be for 60 yards,
Right.
but there's no way this dude is running 40, 50% routes, right?
Yep.
And I feel pretty good about Brian Thomas in that same boat. Like, he is going to be getting 75, 80% routes. So Baker's the only one of your receivers where I think there's that question mark. So that's why it's also important to like, just because they're rookies, we can't just say they're the same, right?
Sure. Totally. No, you're totally right. And really quickly, does it make sense to triple stack here with Greg Dortch, someone who doesn't have a clear role with Kyler and Trey McBride, or do you prefer to take a random round 18 receiver here? What are your thoughts in May?
I think at this point it's better to stack because you're going to draft enough times where you can take those random receivers when it makes sense to
Yeah,
stack them,
totally.
right?
Yep, yep, yep.
So I mean, Elijah Moore is in consideration for me too. I know it
Mm,
feels like a very long time ago, but like he is an explosive player, and um, I mean, look, like he is a guy who he can score 2 touchdowns in a game because he rushes for one and catches one, right? So either of those guys is probably who I'm going to take. I don't think or anyone else. Like, of course, like Hyatt's interesting. I like Jalen Tolbert, A.T. Perry. There's a lot of guys here that I'm like see myself mixing in, right?
much better than the tight end room,
But for the
tight end position because you can make arguments for all of these guys to where they could have usable weeks late. I'm going to take Elijah Moore because that completes the Cleveland triple stack with Deshaun, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, and David Njoku, and I'm a sucker for correlation, so we're going to take that. And I really like four stacking when you have a really uh, balanced running back room and wide receiver heavy early. It really
Mhm.
complements the rest of the team. And I went into this stream with the idea of focusing on this roster construction versus player exposure strategy. And Alita, I appreciate your expertise here because I think we did a really good job of breaking down this team. Now, whether this team wins or not, it's a different story. But just talking through the decisions that you're
Mhm.
making when drafting like this, I think is important, an important lesson that most people can learn by watching.
Mhm. And what I also like to do at the end is just like pull up the draft board and kind of go through like let's like kind of go through each pick and then kind of not saying hindsight 2020, right? But like if we would have did something different, like and that I think that just helps you for future drafts
True.
where you start to kind of see. So like let's so going up at the top, love the first four picks, the first five picks, feeling great. So I think the first opportunity for a detour would have been that Brian Thomas pick. If you said, you know what, we don't have a running back yet, Aaron Jones, he looks great, he's explosive, he's the starting like, because you took Justin Jefferson, I think Aaron Jones could have made sense,
Very
right?
true.
Um, so then kind of coming back around, Kyler, love that. So now you don't have a running back. The first guy you take is Zach Moss. Which I mean, it really is a matter of pick your guy, right? You could have taken Trey Benson, right, and said, you know what, let's. You could have taken James Conner. You could have taken a lot of guys
And to be
for
fair,
that
I messed that up.
projectable volume.
I had meant to take Trey Benson there, so I would have done that if that
Okay,
was the case. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So then, David Njoku, that's where you kind of look at it like, all right, what do we give up here? Um, you know, you could say we could have considered James Conner there. I feel good about not taking any of these receivers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, we gave up James Conner, but like, what's the difference between James Conner and Zeke, who we got around later, right? Versus, so I like that play for sure. So, Chase Brown, that's where it's like, okay, now it kind of goes into that conversation where we want to draft as we're right, but it could go either way. So this could be exactly the pick you needed, or maybe we go back in hindsight and it's like, it would have been nice to either pivot to a receiver, especially knowing, okay, in hindsight, we took Zach Charbonnet and Marshawn Lloyd earlier. But I think that part of the draft is really important. Like from literally pick round 8 to round 12, round 13. They almost look ahead, right, and start to think who are guys you like, how do they correlate with kind of who you want. So, but with that said, I'd say this is a team that I would build, right? I'd give maybe one thing different. I may have taken one less running back. But I love what you did. I think this is the kind of team where it's structurally sound, it correlates, and that's really what we're trying to do.
Exactly. And just the only thing I would have changed is Benson over Zach Moss. But again, that shows some draft rust here. But nonetheless, But we're approaching an hour here, so if you stayed this long, we super appreciate you. We ask you just to drop a like if you've watched this far. That supports the channel for free. Subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Again, we are doing these drafts 4 times per week. We have a team of 5, 6 people here that are going to be drafting, so you'll get various takes, various drafts, various strategies. Subscribing is the best way to get notified when that next draft will be. It's free to do so. Just click that red subscribe button here on YouTube. The next stream will be tomorrow night, Thursday. 8 p.m. Eastern. Chris and Derek will be drafting the single entry $10. Talking about single entry strategy, so you won't
One
want to miss
bullet,
that.
baby.
One bullet. That's all you get. So you don't want to miss that. Um, the ADP tracker is up on the site, occupyfantasy.com. That is fully free to use for everyone. Our best ball guide and Stack Seeker will be released very soon. The Stack Seeker, once the schedule drops, we'll put that tool up on the site so you can correlate all your week 15, 16, 17 matchups. And the best ball guide is going to be a comprehensive guide to breaking down best ball, looking at strategies. TBD on the date, but should be in a couple days or a couple weeks. Stay tuned to follow us on Twitter for more updates there. Lee, any final thoughts here?
Draft season, baby. This is fun. Look forward to doing this some more, and maybe next time you can be the shotgun draw, or the person that's criticizing all my picks as I make them. But no, this is really fun. I'm pumped now that the puppies are out. I can at least feel like I'm drafting without sacrificing EV.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that'll do it for this video. We appreciate everyone watching. PC Lead. You can chat with us in our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Link is in the description below. Obviously, our site is mostly DFS focused. So we're doing a lot of DFS videos here on YouTube, but obviously all the paid tools for daily fantasy sports at occupyfantasy.com. If you're interested in that, go check it out. So for Lead, I'm Brian. Thank you for listening and good luck and continue to enjoy drafting.